Name a more iconic duo than Nintendo and useless predatory lawsuits. I'll wait. That's right, Palworld and telling Nintendo to shove their lawsuit right up their ass. As someone who was incredibly eager to join the hype train for Palworld, but ultimately decided to wait and see what those money-hungry at Nintendo were going to do, experiencing the 1.0 release of the game feels like witnessing a modern-day David and Goliath story. But nice stories mean very little when you're spending money on them. What about the game itself? Is it popular simply because of the source material it borrowed from? Or is there something truly excellent there beyond the gimmick of Pokemon with guns? Well, given the ungodly amount of time I've put into survival games or anything that lets you artistically grind for days on end, I have to say that Palworld is absolutely fantastic in its current state. It's pretty much the love child you'd expect if you took the overall gameplay philosophy of Ark, added the slavery, thrall mechanic from Conan Exiles, and then slapped a Pokemon paint job over it. It's a game that's very obviously designed for die-hard Pokemon fans who have become sick and tired of the same slop that's been regurgitated to them for the past 10 years. But what makes it so groovy is that it works incredibly well as a standalone survival game too. There are some things I'm not too happy about, which will come later, but at its core, the action, exploration mechanics, rate and reward of gear progression, and overall scope of the game are all fucking awesome. I do think it's probably a much more exciting experience when played with others, but even as a solo game, it's still pretty epic all in all. One of the ways it lives up to survival game expectations is that each new tier of gear you unlock remains consistently useful and viable enough that leveling up always feels rewarding, while simultaneously forcing you to carefully pick and choose what you want. Thankfully, the enjoyability of the weapons is compounded by how good the armor looked, especially on my Temu Yoruichi waifu. What really stood out is that many of your pals are actually a part of your gear too, both figuratively and literally. I mean, there's a fox that spits fire harder than M&M in 8 Mile, a fish that turns into a toothed katana, and an unsuspectingly cute little penguin with hatred and malice in their heart who secretly yearns to kamikaze genocide the other pals on the island. The point of all of this is that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to the gameplay, and you have to engage all of the systems equally if you want to have a good time. And speaking of good times, the overall map and world they've created for you to play around in feels remarkably intentional and involved. There's a distinct amount of verticality to the game that a lot of survival games lack nowadays, and is made even more fun to explore thanks to the different tools you're given. Sure, you could just climb on your completely distinct and totally not ripped off pal and fly to the top of that mountain over there. But you're a survival game player and a Pokemon fan. You need to do things the slow and grindy way. I mean, why fly there when you could travel about like Inspector Gadget using his go-go Chinese sweatshop grappling gun?
The design is very human.
Thankfully, getting around is not only mechanically fun, but also visually rewarding too, thanks to how distinct and striking the biomes themselves are. There's very little space wasted on filler areas, and even the ones they do have at least make for nice set pieces as you're traveling around. This visual distinctness means that the main zones are logically very easy to understand, to the point of being somewhat cliché at times. But the upside is that their designs give you a clear direction of where to go for the different kinds of would-be lifelong friends you plan on capturing through pacifism and rigorous verbal discourse. Now of course, what would a discussion about Palworld be if it didn't cover the thing we all care about the most?
Slavery.
What of the pals you capture themselves? Are they just a cheap gimmick or an interesting part of the game? Well, one thing I know for sure is this game has had furries licking their lips harder than high-ranking elected officials at a Jeffrey. And don't get me wrong, I definitely Pokemoned at a few of them myself. But here's where I give my most controversial and self-admittedly highly subjective opinion. I genuinely fucking hated how underwhelming the design and mechanics of the pals were. I get it. it's very obvious they tried to copy Pokemon style and tell Nintendo, if you won't give the fans what they want, we will. But fuck me sideways, choosing Fortnite anime designs over something more stylistic or cool was such a massive wasted opportunity. How are you going to give me a Pokemon's game with guns, slavery and cannibalism and not make it look at least a little edgy or cool? I mean, ever since those absolute mad lads at Warner Brothers put Succubus Lola Bunny in Space Jam, I've been running hotter than Randy Savage at the boiling point. And I really felt like this was an incredibly lazy or stylistically cheap choice they made, which would be fine if the pals themselves felt a little more intentional and useful in combat. Like I mentioned before, Palworld uses the arc approach to gameplay where your companions are a fundamental part of the action. What really disappointed me though was how poorly those pals were implemented into the action, and it really felt like this part of combat was treated as an afterthought. It's basically just a random bunch of special moves each pal uses after a preset amount of time has passed, and sure, you can pick and choose what abilities they have, but forcing you to have to mount your pals to have any semblance of control during skirmishes, especially during the sick-ass raid bosses in the game, feels like a massively wasted opportunity. This system would have been infinitely better and felt much more involved if it had the Final Fantasy VII Remake approach to fighting, where the general action is done real time, but the turn-based elements have a manual scheme to them. And lastly, one of the things they added in 1.0 was a basic story that gives a general sense of what to do, which is nice, but for the love of God, a good sandbox should be one that lets you explore freely while still giving you enough to do to make that ride a smooth experience. Palworld does not do that. There were at least 4 or 5 times where I had to do the same repetitive shit for hours at a time because the game basically hit a brick wall of nothingness. Even with the plethora of new pals they added, this unfortunately seems to be a problem people had before that I would say definitely still existed for me. The thing that really sucked the energy out at times was how milquetoast the base building was. As someone who put just under 400 hours into the mental bamboo torture that was Fallout 76 at launch, simply for how much I loved making different camps, it's incredibly apparent how lacking this game is in creativity and expression with regards to base design. In Palworld, your base doesn't feel like a home that is there for you to showcase your creativity, but rather as a sterile and formulaic workshop that gives you very little reason to try and do anything fun or exploratory. Now, you could argue that this game was made for Pokemon players, and your time is supposed to be rather spent on grinding the different hokey Pokemon again and again for 300 hours at a time. I am fully comfortable admitting I might not be their target player in this regard. For me personally though, that seems fucking mind-numbingly bland for a game of this sorts. Either way, putting all of those critiques aside, there is one very important thing about this game that needs to be discussed. Pocket Pair aren't the only ones using Palworld to send a message, and I too benefit greatly from their 1.0 release. Allow me to take you back in time to long ago, to the distant era of April 24th, when my No Rest for the Wicked price tag take was bombarded with numerous sloppy arguments by intellectually lazy fuckheads. Well, they can all eat shit now because this game is significantly more popular, equally as polished, offers just as many if not more hours than No Rest for the Wicked, has an active lawsuit against it, and Pocket Pair still chose to not raise the price after leaving early access as a thank you to the fans for their support. So kiss my ass, dorks. It's a perfectly fine standard to expect companies to not charge you 50% more for a game leaving early access, especially when that game already costs $40 to begin with. Palworld sets a phenomenal standard in this regard, and even though I know it won't, one can only hope this game causes people to stop basing their values and expectations on reactionary emotional impulses, but rather on a set of consistent expectations that are applied regardless of whether they win or lose.